If you are a landlord or a tenant and you want to know what are the obligations that you have in relation to your tenancy contracts in Dubai, in this episode, this is exactly what we are discussing. And I think we covered the main obligations, Michael, don't you think?
I think we really did. This video ran a little bit longer than normal,
Yeah.
and you're going to want to watch right the way to the very end because we really do cover some of the main situations and scenarios that you, as either a landlord or tenant, might find yourselves in.
Yeah. Enjoy watching. Hi everyone and welcome to Dubai Property Legal Guide, a series of videos I'm making answering the most common questions I'm receiving from property owners, landlords, tenants, investors, and property brokers. Joining me today is Michael from my social media team. How are you doing, Michael?
Good, thanks, thank you.
What do we have today now?
So today I'm excited because we've got quite a good topic, and I've got some interesting questions that I'm going to ask you. Are you ready?
I was born ready.
Awesome. So the topic that we're going to be talking about today is the main obligations that a tenant and a landlord have to each other as relates to the lease agreement, as relates to their contract. So tell me a bit about these obligations. Who needs to do what?
As you refer to, both parties have their own sets of obligations toward each other, both the landlord and tenant. These obligations are set out by the law, and we can discuss it today in today's episode.
Well, let's start with the landlord then. Tell me a bit about their main obligations towards the tenant.
Absolutely. Landlord has certain obligations toward the tenant. Number one, what I can pinpoint here is the landlord has to hand over the property in a good condition that enables the tenant to use that facility or to use that property for its own purpose, for the purpose that the tenant has actually concluded. Another obligation that I can mention here is that landlord will be responsible for the maintenance of the property. There are certain defects and defaults in the property that will be the responsibility of landlord to take care of it.
So tell me, I'm sure that has to do with normal wear and tear, normal usage of a property by a tenant will come with some things that have to be taken care of. What kind of maintenance does that require?
See, if I want to explain this is a very problematic scenario that we have normally in the relationship between landlord and the tenant. It's a bit ambiguous, and mainly tenant will have this question, and they come to us and ask us where we are standing, what is it that we are responsible for. In very brief terms, landlord is in charge of major maintenance, tenant is in charge of minor maintenance. Major maintenance, I'm referring to something in the structure of the building. Say, for example, if the electricity, the power supply, if these are the issues, then the landlord has to take care of it. Anything related to structure of the building and the apartment is the responsibility of the landlord. But minor maintenance of the apartments, it's the tenant's obligation.
Now, I'm assuming that the costs must vary hugely, but as a renter in Dubai, I've put down a security deposit on that, and you hear occasionally of the maintenance kind of getting in the way of this. So tell me a little bit, what happens in my case? Let's say that the maintenance costs that the landlord has to cover, let's say for argument's sake that it goes over the value of my security deposit. What happens then?
That's a very good point, in fact. So the security deposit is there for the time of eviction or the expiry of the tenancy contract, where the landlord has the right to use that just in case that the tenant has already created some damages or not willing to fix those damages, then the landlord will be able to use that security. But to answer your question, if the charges for repairing the property and bringing it to the proper condition will exceed the amount of security deposit, then the landlord has the right to file a case to the tenant and request to make that payment or settle that charges before the expiry or even after the expiry.
That's interesting. I'm not sure too many people are aware of that.
Well, landlord, they should, because otherwise they have to pay from their own pocket.
Something they want to avoid, I'm sure. So tell me, what other main obligations are there for a landlord?
The main obligations of a landlord, I brought it all here because there are plenty of them. One other thing that I can refer to is that they cannot make any changes in property which will affect the intended use or benefit of the property. Say, for example, if the property has been rented to a tenant on residential basis, and then the landlord will make sort of changes that will cause trouble for the tenant in order to occupy the property. In which sense? They have created a storage inside the apartment, which we had a case. A client was complaining that landlord is keeping his personal or private materials or assets inside the building and is using part of the building as a storage space. So that is basically interrupting the relationship. This is something that landlords should avoid. And then I think that's all about it. There are basically four main obligations that we just discussed about the landlord.
Now, from the tenant's perspective, they've also got some stuff that they need to uphold on
Absolutely.
their side of it. So tell me about the tenant's obligations.
The main obligation of tenant, obviously, it comes back to the rent. In most cases, especially these days, tenants are accepting long like 12 installments, 6 installments. So the rent will be paid in different installments. One of the things that they have to make sure of is that they're gonna settle or they're gonna honor their checks on the due date. This is the obligation number one, to pay the rent on the due date. Yeah. The other obligation that I can refer to is to take care of the property and preserve the condition and the property in a way that as if it's their own property. This is what has been demanded by law. Taking care of the property in sense of making sure that it will not be damaged if there are certain apartments that they rent on furnished basis. So they have to make sure that even the furniture is been kept in a good condition and situation. Another thing that I can say here is that the tenant, upon expiry of the tenancy contract, have to make sure that they return the property to the landlord in the same condition that they have received it.
That sounds. You
I,
mentioned
I
ambiguity
knew this would
earlier.
come up. Yeah.
That one makes me nervous. How do you even measure that? How would you define what is and isn't normal usage?
Okay, it's very common sense, Michael. People, they tend to make it more complicated, and I think sometimes greed is also causing this. The landlord, in some situations, they try to convince the tenant that they have to paint the property, they have to clean it in the best way possible, like deep cleaning. Or I had recently a case that the landlord was asking the tenant the holes, like few screws that they put on the wall, they have to fix that. They have to remove those holes. They have to repaint the whole property. These are actually very very unfair demands from the landlord. The law doesn't allow this. The law says that normal wear and tear is acceptable. What does it mean? It means that if I'm living in an apartment for a year or so, it's very normal that if I hang a frame on the
Of
wall and I
course,
put
yeah.
a few screws on the wall, as long as I'm not breaking anything, I'm not damaging anything, it should be okay. This is absolutely fine. The landlord can never ask me to repair these damages because these
Interesting.
are the normal wear and tear that comes along with the usage.
Precisely. And I'm gonna bring that back again to the security deposit. People, landlords saying that, okay, well, I'm not going to give you back your security
Unless
deposit
if you
because
do,
there's a
yeah,
screw in the wall. So that's actually not even
it's not
supported by
acceptable.
law. It's not.
Absolutely not.
Interesting.
And if the landlord insists on taking the security deposit, I would definitely advise the tenant to go to RDC and file a case against them and ask for the security to be returned.
That is really interesting. Now, you mentioned that there are quite a few, so I'm going to let you get on with the rest. What else is there that a tenant is obliged to do?
There are other points like tenant shall pay all the fees and taxes which is involved in this relationship, unless if these terms are agreed against it as per the tenancy contract. So the law says that the tenant has to pay the fees and charges and taxes, but in some occasions we see that the landlord is convinced to accept these fees and charges, and then the tenant will be relieved from that. Another point is that in some occasions, I do this a lot in my apartments. Whenever I rent an apartment, I do a massive change internally. The interior, I change it the way that I like it. Yeah, but what I make sure of is that I put it in writing, something that people they neglect. Put it in writing, send it to the landlord, ask for permission. Tell them that, hey guys, this is what I'm going to do in your apartment, and basically it will improve the quality of the apartment. Most of my landlords are super happy to accept this.
Of
Yeah,
course, yeah.
because I'm actually adding value to the apartment. So, but in some occasions, the landlord will say that I have no issues if you're going to do this, but you need to return it back to the same condition that I have given it to you. At the beginning, I felt that this is unnecessary, why they are asking that, but then I was convinced because not every other tenant that they're going to rent the property after me will like my design.
Of course.
They might like something else, so they want to make sure that this is going back to the zero
Yeah, of course, exactly as
situation,
it
and
started.
then they're going to build from that point on. So that is why the law is also asking that we need to make sure that this will go back to the same situation. However, if I did any sort of fixed improvement, for example, if I have created an extra wall, if I have did a certain type of ceilings, yeah, so these are all fixed improvements. Um, I should not remove it unless if both parties agree on this.
Let's say then you're the tenant, you've come into the apartment, you've changed perhaps the ceiling. Let's go with that example. You then are asked by the landlord to remove the ceiling. Do you, as the tenant, have any right to say, well, no, I'm not going to remove it?
So this will cover two clauses. Clause number one is that I have to return the apartment to the same situation and condition that it was in previously. And then the second clause is where the law says you should not remove what you have actually fixed, assuming that I have got permission from the landlord and I have created that fixtures. Okay? So that has been done already based on the approval that I got. So now when I want to evict and leave the property, I should ask the landlord whether he wants me to remove it or no. If sometimes it happens that the tenant wants to, I don't know, put a pressure on the landlord or start threatening him that, okay, all these fixtures that I did, I'm going to just remove it.
Interesting.
So the landlord wants to keep it, the tenant wants to remove it. As per the law, I'm not allowed to remove any fixtures unless both parties
Unless
agree.
both parties agree. That sounds like a potential minefield, but also something for the IDC, no doubt.
That's true. That's true. Um, I think another point that I have here is that the very common issue. I'm not allowed to sublease the property to someone else, nor I can assign the benefits of this property to anyone else, unless if I have a written approval from the tenant, from the landlord. Sorry, these are all the main obligations of a tenant.
And those seem also to be pretty straightforward, but I'm sure that there's obviously always those cases in between that pop out and might change things. On that note, we've cleared up both sides, actually, the landlord's main obligations and the tenant's main obligations. I think it's absolutely crucial that everyone knows these things. And on that note, it's back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael, for doing this with me. And for everyone else watching, I hope that this was beneficial and you got all the information that you need. Still, if you have any further questions, I would be more than happy to receive your emails at arash@zodlaw.com. You can even go to my social media platforms and send me a direct message over there. I'm going to see you on the next episode.